Welcome everyone to History Gone Wilder, part of Half History Will Travel. I am your host, the Wilder Historian, and Hill just fell into a Union trap at Bristow Station. But now the Confederate Army pulled back to the Rappahannock to spend its winter quarters. After the Battle of Bristow Station, Lee called off the offensive. The Union Army was on the run, but they could get to the fortifications of Washington, D.C. before he could deliver a devastating blow to them. So the Army of Northern Virginia pulled back to the Rappahannock River, with the men encamped on the south side, huddled around campfires as the cold winter air hurt them inside and out. Hill was in a sour mood, and he hurt the feelings of some of his Culpeper friends when they offered him a 60-man contingent of local troops as a personal bodyguard. Hill responded, "I have no use for an escort. Besides, sir, I think that your 60 able-bodied men could render better service to the country by joining the ranks of some infantry regiment than by acting as bodyguard to any general." While in winter camp, two rumors swirled around the Confederate camps. One asserted that Lee placed Hill under arrest for mismanagement at Bristow Station. Another one claimed Lee was transferring Hill and his corps to Tennessee. Both were false rumors. On November 1st, Hill got word from Richmond that Dolly had given birth to a daughter. In honor of Hill's sister and the man he most admired, this third girl was named Lucy Lee. Soldiers in Hill's corps affectionately built a rough-hewn cradle and presented it to the family. Also in early November, Meade's Army of the Potomac lunged southward, capturing about 2,000 soldiers of Ewell's corps near Rappahannock Station. Hill quickly removed his men to the south side of the Rapidan River. Meade, pressured by Washington to perform some action before winter fully set in, planned to slip around Lee's right flank near Mine Run and draw the Confederate general into open battle. Jeb Stuart's cavalry detected the flanking movement of Meade's army, and Lee quickly moved troops to block Meade's advance at Mine Run. Hill's men relieved the retreating cavalry, who delayed the Union advance, then formed up behind formidable breastworks to the west of Mine Run. November 30th passed with both armies jockeying for position and awaiting a movement by the other. Lee, Hill, and their staffs rode along the lines and came upon a group of soldiers huddled together in a prayer service. All of the riders dismounted and removed their hats and stood silently until finished. Afterward, Hill remained quiet and appeared, according to one of his staff, thoughtful almost to the point of tenderness. Not content waiting on the Union Army to make the next move, Lee ordered Hill to march in the darkness to Meade's left flank and rear, and at dawn attack, sending Meade's army into disarray. At dawn, Hill's men rushed forward, but only found abandoned camps. Meade's army had left during the night. Hill rushed forward to give chase, but was unable to catch up to the retreating enemy, only managing to capture around 200 men and a few muskets. Both armies then settled back into their former positions and awaited the spring. On December 6th, Lee, Stuart, and Hill attended the church service at the Episcopal Church in Orange, and the next day Hill wrote a thank you letter for a unique present. When his men returned to their places along the Rapidan, Hill received a pair of silver spurs as a gift from, as they termed themselves, the young countrywomen of Columbia, South Carolina. In their letter that accompanied the spurs, they announced that they vowed to never marry anyone but a Southern soldier. The following is Hill's thank you letter. My dear Miss Mary, the very handsome pair of spurs so kindly presented to me by yourself and young friends have been received, and I thank you most heartily for the token of goodwill and of the esteem in which you hold services incident to my position. If I have done aught to win these spurs, the gallant soldiers of your own native state are entitled partly to the credit. They have never faltered when the charge was sounded. The noble, steadfast devotion of the few in the field should cull a blush of shame to the cheeks of those who are fattening at home upon the distress of their country. At all events, mete out to them the punishment you threaten, and never let them know the cheer of a domestic fireside, or be smiled upon by heaven's last best gift, women. When these cruel wars are over, Miss Mary, I shall be reminded of Columbia, and I hope spurred to a visit in that direction to meet my kind friends. Please remember me affectionately to your young friends and give to each a kiss for me, which I will repay to you with interest when we meet. Very affectionately, your friend, A.P. Hill. In December, Dolly came to Hill, and they spent some time together, but by January 7th, they traveled to Richmond to welcome her brother, John Hunt Morgan, back into the Confederacy. Just weeks before, Morgan escaped from a federal prison in Ohio and was now being given a hero's welcome in Richmond. General Stuart and John B. Gordon joined Hill on this journey, At the celebration, it was called on for Hill to speak, but he simply approached the crowd, bowed, and then retired. Stuart spoke, as one observer said, with all his voice. Before he left Richmond, he and Morgan visited Libby Prison and talked with some of the federal prisoners, particularly the ones from Kentucky. Hill, Dolly, John, and his wife attended church at St. Paul's Episcopal Church. Then Hill, Dolly, and the children traveled to the front. The family stayed in the 3-story mansion of Colonel John Willis, with his headquarters tent pitched in the front yard. Lee made frequent visits to the estate to meet with Hill, and the two grew incredibly close. When rumors continued to swirl about more troops being sent to the Army of Tennessee, Lee informed Jefferson Davis he was willing to send any of his generals, except Hill. Hill also spent the winter defending one of his friends, Henry Heath. After Gettysburg, Fallen Waters, and Bristow Station, many accused Heath of incompetence. Heath went to Richmond with written testimonials attesting to his abilities. Hill's testimony read, "Having been informed that it was possible some misapprehensions existed in regard to your management of your division at Gettysburg, Fallen Waters, and Bristow, it is but simple justice to you that I say your conduct in all those occasions met with approbation." Hill repeated that the responsibility for Bristow Station was exclusively his. At Bristow, the attack was ordered by me and most gallantly made by your division. Another corps of the enemy coming up on your right was unforeseen, as I had supposed that the other troops were taking care of them. The Army healed from the Gettysburg and Bristow Station campaigns, with Hill's corps numbering around 19,000 men, many of them North Carolina troops. This concentration of Tar Heels brought the governor of North Carolina, Zebulon Vance, into the camp to deliver speeches, attended by Hill, Lee, and General Robert Rhodes. Word started to spread through the camp that Ulysses S. Grant from the west now took command of all Union forces and made his headquarters with the Army of the Potomac. Supplies like ammunition and bandages flooded the Army of Northern Virginia as the spring campaign approached. Generals' wives made their way out of the camp, but Dolly, as usual, stayed with her husband as long as she possibly could, planning to stay in Lexington during the campaign. Before she left on May 1st at St. Thomas Episcopal Church, Reverend Richard Davis baptized Lucy Hill in a small ceremony, with General Lee being named godfather. Lee held the infant throughout most of the service. Hill's staff, his wife, and Lee all saw a problem arising out of the 3rd Corps commander. He was not well. His prostatitis hurt him considerably, and he was growing weaker. By May, his walk was noticeably slow, his cheeks were becoming pronouncedly sunken, and a weary, sad haze seemed at times to cover those once flashing hazel eyes. For a period in March, he had to relinquish command of the Corps while he lay in bed sick. Not only did the prostatitis impact his health, nephritis, the inflammation of the kidneys, began around that time as well. From atop Clark's Mountain, Lee and his Corps commanders, Longstreet, Ewell, and Hill, overlooked the landscape below. He concluded that Grant would move against his right, and that when Grant moved, they would move. At that moment, Lee's army sprawled over the countryside for guarding pivotal points and to reduce the stress on the landscape and civilians to supply soldiers with food. When Grant moved, it would be difficult to concentrate his army to counter the Union general's move. On May 4th, the Union army moved, and Lee reacted. Hill proceeded with Heath's division in the lead and Wilcox behind him. Anderson remained in the rear to guard the wagons. They traveled along the Orange Plank Road to block Grant. They camped by the road that night. Lee and Hill made their headquarters close together. The next morning, Hill's division began their march eastward. Lee rode with Hill on the Orange Plank Road as Ewell drove his men parallel to Hill on the Orange Turnpike. Passing their mine-run earthworks, they continued toward an area familiar to them, an area known as the Wilderness.